Welcome to Windows on the World. Join us live every Sunday, 8 p.m. UK time, windowsontheworld.net, and do check out the archive and program stream on the website. Hi, you may have noticed that I'm uploading some of our content to YouTube after quite a long period of time when we're using other platforms. The reason for this, of course, was because we had a lot of content removed. And I'm now putting up selected shows on YouTube with links underneath. The links underneath are very important because they contain how the whole thing joins up and it takes you into the website. The website contains a huge archive of material, which is like an encyclopedia. This particular show that I'm uploading here is a short address I gave to a group of people in the UK over the internet, and it describes how global governance works. It was completely off the cuff, pulled it out the top of my head, which I prefer doing, and it's got all the information in. But underneath, there's some links. You can see them under this little ticker tape under my face here. So do join us 8 p.m. live every Sunday, windowsontheworld.net, and stay in touch with the website. The reason I like uploading certain shows onto YouTube now is because really of the comments. People actually put comments up there, and it's very, very helpful. And I also like to thank the people who send in material through the website, because that validates what we're putting out, and it also accumulates more information so it can be more accurate. And that's the idea. This is just about information and the use and correct use of information. We cannot really say that we are informed unless we know what is behind what's going on and actually the agendas which drive it. And it's all about the real versus the stated goals and the two lies that people are put between. And we've really covered that in the Protocols of Power, which was a series we did a while ago. I've actually uploaded the first one of those onto YouTube, and I'll upload some more, but they're all on the website, windowsontheworld.net. Look at the Protocols of Power, and there's another article called Know the Enemy Within, which is underneath this, and that's got loads and loads of links. So if you're interested in how global governance actually works, look into that, and you'll find it very informative and actually very simple. There is nothing complicated going on whatsoever. All of this stuff is very simple, and there are a few people who get it and the majority who don't, but it's always going to be like that. So I hope you enjoy the content I'm putting on YouTube, but remember, the bulk of all of our content is on the website, and that is where you will find information which you can really join the dots with. That's the whole purpose of the shows. And thanks to everyone who supports the show and everyone who stays in touch through the website. I'll be doing some more live streams soon as well, but I've got so much stuff that I love putting out, and especially the historical stuff we're getting into, because that really joins the dots to the bigger picture. And that's all these shows are for, about joining the dots of how things actually work. Yes, the real versus the stated goals again. So thanks to everybody who supports the show, and I will probably be doing some live streams too, but stay in touch through the website. I'd been tracking what's known as Agenda 21, now Agenda 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals, for quite some time. And in 2014, I started to see it absolutely rolled out in Waltham Forest as per the plans, which I'd already seen. And there is basically a conference every year about this, about global governance. And the things that they actually say in these conferences are very chilling if you understand the limited language that they're actually using. So when we talk about sustainable development, what we're actually talking about is a depopulation program and management of all resources on the planet, including human resources, which is why there is a depopulation agenda at the moment. And that depopulation agenda is going to be played out over the next couple of years, because the whole idea of sustainable development is a massively reduced population. So the whole point of this is that it's worked out in a way that is attractive to the public. So in other words, it starts with 20-mile-per-hour zones and speed humps. And then you get cycling lobbyist groups coming in and saying, how much more cycling do you want? We have change agent groups, which I've studied for many years, and a lot of this filters down through think tanks. So what we're looking at here, even locally, is a global system which is implemented at a local level. And it's called Agenda 21 and now Agenda 2030. It started to get into UK councils, really get going about the year 2000, and it came out of the Rio conference in 1992, and it came through Rio as the climate change agenda. There was a document before that called Our Common Future in 1987, authored by Gro Harlem Brundtland, who was then the Prime Minister of Norway. She's now part of a group called the Elders, who are a UN mentoring group for sustainable development. And the whole idea of sustainable development is that every human action has to be accounted for. In other words, we're talking about a new form of governance in that it's presented as a benefit and as a necessity that we are carbon taxed and controlled and managed. And it's done under a technocratic system. Technocracy was very popular in the 1930s. And if you go to technocracy.inc, it's still there. So the idea about the whole thing and the governance system at the moment is it's run as a technocracy, which means that you have this artificial intelligence and basically internet-driven governance system with the human resources, the social capital underneath it being controlled through a system called Communitarianism. In 2010, David Cameron announced Communitarianism and the Big Society, same time as Obama announced it in America. The result of that was hundreds of civil society groups, which are in your local neighborhood. And whenever there's going to be a big change, these groups will appear. And they are lobbying groups. They go under different names. Some of them are protest groups. Some of them are government-funded groups. A lot of it is funded by things like the lottery fund, and it was EU money to start with. Now, the thing is that you're talking about a system that most of the public cannot see. They cannot see this system. They still think that we have these people in government and those people shouting at each other over benches in the Houses of Parliament and making the decisions, and they're not. And this story goes back about 40 years, really. But if we go to the birth of the environment movement and where it came out of the eugenics movement, and a group generally called the British were very involved in this. First of all, to make it simple, we had nationalism. Then we had internationalism, and now we have globalism. In other words, at the top, countries do not matter. The whole idea of this and the idea of sustainable development and the new totalitarian system which is behind it is that you have a very highly managed population, and that population is going to be relocated into cities. And that is the aim of the UN. By 2050, they wanted everyone living in cities. They're going to try and do it before that. There's many drivers to this. COVID-19 is merely a driver of this. It's an accelerant of this system. We've had this before, but it looks as though this is now the point where they won't turn back. So there's a psychological warfare program being played out on the public, and this is a full-on war on what people would call humanity. Now, the problem we have is that many people defend this new system because they believe that it's about the common good. Well, let's have a look what the common good means. The common good is a communitarian term. It used to mean for the common good of everybody. Now it means that there is a group consensus. And that group consensus has been manufactured. So what you will find, to give you an example of how this works locally, say there's going to be a new development on your doorstep. That new development will go ahead, and you will believe that there's been participation. And they will tell you that 65% of people are in favour, in most cases, to these new things that are happening. It's a complete and bald-faced lie. I've investigated this for many years. So what you have is groups of people who are changing society, and they are mentored into the attributes and the belief system of sustainable development, which is a totalitarian system masquerading as environmentalism. So in other words, the environmentalism is a driver of the new system. So Then we get into debates about climate change and all the rest of it. None of this is actually important anymore, because once you see the drivers of this system, none of that matters. What we are going into now is something that's been planned for a long time. I knew this was coming 20 years ago. Nobody was interested, and very few people are interested now. But I can explain to you how this governance system works, who's behind it, how it operates, and in a way what to do about it. We're talking about a system which infiltrates everything. Okay, let's compare it to other systems. We've had communism that got a bit of a bad press because the Bolsheviks killed many, many millions of people. Now, they don't want that to be happening again. So what they want to really achieve is for the public to partake in their own genocide, which is what Agenda 21 actually is. Now, to answer your question, the way this works is very simple. Everybody becomes part of the communitarian system. Anybody who questions it is demonized by those within the system. So it's an intolerant system that masquerades as the community. Whenever you see the words the community, be very, very wary, because they are trying to capture public opinion all over the place. For instance, when I looked into this, and this is part of the solution, by the way, but you have to know how to deal with the problem first, because you'll never get to the solution if you don't know the problem. When the Occupy protests started in London, I studied very closely how they were infiltrated and taken over. And George Soros got involved pretty much from the beginning. Now, what happens is a template appears. And part of the solution to this is knowing what the template actually is. So what you have is facilitators, co-facilitators, and a thing called Delphi technique. Every council meeting is run along these lines. So this doesn't matter whether it's a protest group like Extinction Rebellion, which was run merely to bring in more of a police state. And it was the aim of it was to, yes, bring in more draconian powers and rules, which it did. And one of the aims of Extinction Rebellion was the destruction of Western democracy. That is the inevitable destruction of Western democracy. And the new idea that they had was rising from the wreckage. And they called it sortition. So then what happens is this: you get things called citizens' assemblies. Now, it doesn't matter whether you're talking about a protest like Occupy London, where they had groups called general assemblies, or whether you have citizens' assemblies, the result is the same. What happens is a facilitator steers the group into the already predicted and intended outcome. And that is done very, very simply by giving limited choices and closing doors as you go along. So anything that you get involved with where you see these signs of a facilitated group with people around tables and facilitators, co-facilitators, and they're giving you forms to fill in, and then they're having a panel of so-called experts, be very wary, because that's nothing to do with participatory democracy. It's called, what they call it is direct democracy, and it's meant to represent the people. Of course, it doesn't. The whole idea of this system is that it's made to look as though the public are making these decisions when they're not. So that is the trick. It's absolutely deceptive. And by the time these plans or whatever's going to happen has gone through, it's too late. That new development is there. The roads are already closed. Or in the case of what's going on now, the public have agreed to be vaccinated. It really doesn't matter, because now the plan of this is so audacious that the template is glaringly obvious. And the template of communitarianism is very, very simple to understand once you know what you're looking for. But the problem is that everything in the United Kingdom is absolutely infiltrated. There is nothing in the country which is not infiltrated. It doesn't matter whether it's a protest group like Occupy, which was taken over by 4 or 5 people and undercover police, or the more recent protests, which have been taken over in exactly the same way. How do I know this? Because of some of the organizations that are attaching themselves to these new protests are all the same sort of organizations, and indeed some of the same ones which came along with Occupy. And they were based at a place called London Action Resource Centre in Whitechapel. And we actually did an investigation into that. And it's a hub of undercover police operation. I did an article called COVID Protest Social Engineers, and take a look at it. It's on windowsontheworld.net. So to now get to the solutions, what I would say is that every group has to be absolutely deregulated from any system, and they have to be basically having a definite aim. So once a group is formed, if it doesn't have a definite aim, it will achieve nothing, and there will be infighting, it will drift off. If it's a social group and it's just for social support, that's fine. I think, in my view, to define the central aim of what the group is for is the most important thing, because a group without a central aim will be taken over and steered into a different direction. And that happens with all groups. And I think that we did a kind of, I'll read this out actually, because it's quite interesting. And it's a way of usurping people who want to usurp the narrative. When you form a group, you have to make sure that people know that you are unaffiliated, you have no political connections, because if you start achieving anything in the UK, all of a sudden you're going to be right-wing, you're going to be this, you're going to be that. There's only five terms that the intelligence services use, and they will use them all. They've used them on me. It's comedic when you get to know how simple it is. But the main thing is to be unaffiliated. So you can say something along the lines of, we are an unaffiliated group of local residents concerned about the lack of democratic process in local government planning and policy. It doesn't matter what you actually put at the end of that, but as long as you say you are unaffiliated and you are concerned about the lack of democratic process. Now, the reason I say that is because all of the controlled groups, the things called citizens' assemblies, people's assemblies, etc., are all, they propose this idea that they are giving the public participation, when of course they're not. They're steering a few of the members of the public into an already predicted outcome. The outcome's already predicted. All is that you need to do is steer the people into it. So you have to make sure that people know that that's not what it's about. The next thing I put in was, we will remain unaffiliated as individuals acting collectively and within the law towards a truly inclusive democratic process where all voices are heard. Now, what you get constantly from this communitarian agenda is that it's inclusive. So you start using the words inclusive because you are genuinely inclusive. Basically, the whole of this narrative and the words that they use has been hijacked. So when they mean sustainable, they mean basically rationing and depopulation. When they say diversity, they mean everybody will be made to think and say the same thing. When they say vibrant, they mean dull, basically, because these new places that are built are not vibrant at all. They are opposite of vibrant. So if you say you're going to remain unaffiliated as individuals acting collectively within the law towards a truly inclusive democratic process where all voices are heard, you tick every single box of what you are trying, what basically you will be usurped into. And that's incredibly important. And another very important thing with a group is to say you are not affiliated with any group or organization whatsoever, because the first thing that will happen if you achieve anything is they will link you to something which is negative in the eyes of the public. Now, you might think I'm being a little bit paranoid here and overdoing it, but I know from experience that if any group in the UK has any kind of success, it will be absolutely ripped apart. So you have to be ready for that. And it also depends what you want to achieve. And if you work within the parameters of communitarianism, in other words, always take the moral high ground. Always take the moral high ground, because you have the moral high ground. So that is extremely important. And all this stuff has been extremely useful to me over the years. I've won many court cases against councils. The stuff I put out is 100% factual, and it's all been tried and tested. So, okay, another point is also say that this does not mean that we do or do not endorse other groups. So in other words, you don't get yourself tied to anything. So when people try and tie you to a political ideology, you say we are apolitical. We are people of all different types. So, for instance, there was a group in London called the Keep Talking Group, and Hope Not Hate, who were basically an arm of British intelligence services, did a 3-year investigation into them. They couldn't really find much, but what they said was that it was a place where the far right and the far left met. Well, what would be wrong with that ideologically? So this is the sort of thing that you will be up against. And if you start to have any success locally, it will happen. But what I would say is that you need to appoint your own people who are going to talk to the press if you're going to get involved in anything like that. And then you refer to them as a community organizer, because community organizers are a huge part of this system. So I'm not talking here about you. I'm talking about the people who are paid to be community organizers, who work and are mentored as what are known as social entrepreneurs. Not all social entrepreneurs are involved in this, but from 2010 onwards, people in groups which were linked to the UN objectives, and there are hundreds of them in the UK. In fact, it's hard to find anything that isn't. We're using Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals. And maybe we could talk a little bit about that in case people haven't heard of it. This system can be usurped, but you have to usurp it within the parameters of what they are trying to impose. And that is like a form of infiltration. So in other words, you're infiltrating their system rather than letting it infiltrate you. Now, that might sound a little esoteric to most people in the room, but because of the way this system works, it's extremely insidious. For instance, the Saul Alinsky rules for radicals basically say nothing is off the table. In 2010, David Cameron in the UK and Obama in America announced that they were going to introduce the concept of community organizing. And I've been the victim of that community organizing. And I can tell you something, I don't want to put you off anything here, because what you're doing is a small local group. But people do not realize that at the top end of this, people get killed. At the lower end, they might get intrusion and aggravation. But if you know how this works and what to look for, you can get over it. So I wouldn't be scared of it. And if your point is about the group, all for one and one for all, well, you need a unifying aim. One aim which unifies the group. And that could be something as simple as growing fruit and veg. You know, you have to layer it into what you want to do. If it's a lobbying group against, say, a development or something happening or the closure of roads, you need a cell within the group, and the group has to be behind it. What they're going to do is demonize you. These people have so many agents within the system. It's absolutely astonishing what happens. And Gonzalo knows this, because we were talking about Waltham Forest. It was a great example, because Waltham Forest became the first mini Holland. And I knew what was going to happen. These people literally turned up overnight into the area. And all of a sudden, they are the voice of the community. Well, wait a minute. Nobody I knew had seen them before. And the real community was completely marginalized. I'd like to refer to a show and a friend of mine from Walthamstow, Teresa. She died, unfortunately, a few years ago. But we did a show called The Big Society Unveiled. The Big Society Unveiled on YouTube. And that is now about 6 or 7 years old. But there is information in there on how this system works. And it was relevant then, and it's more relevant now. And also, this system is testing something. In 1969, a pediatrician called Dr. Richard Day made an off-the-cuff speech, and it's called The New Barbarians. And it was at Mount Sinai Hospital, just outside New York, I think. And he worked for Planned Parenthood, which became the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And he accurately predicted everything that was going to happen. And what he said was, people do not know the right questions to ask. They are too trusting. and they will not ask the right questions. And there's a lot of clues in what he's saying. I've done several shows on it, and he accurately predicted what's happened, the degeneration of society. For instance, he said the churches will help us, and they have. I do believe that the people who resist this will stand a better chance and ultimately will be able to start something else. But I think you have to be very organized and take it seriously, because the resistance of anything that you get up to from change agents in the community will, first of all, be quite frightening. But these people have a very limited template within what they're doing. So I would say that you should stand up for yourself and the group, but the group needs to be unified around a cause. Otherwise, somebody will come into that group and start disrupting it. And it happens to all groups. It doesn't matter how well-intentioned you are. It's like council meetings. It's all the same thing. They're using the same infiltration techniques, which we can talk about if we want to have another one of these. But for today, it's probably a bit mind-blowing. But there's plenty of stuff on my website about it. And yes, I've been trying to encourage people to form unstructured groups. In other words, you have no political ideology. You're not pushing anything. You're a group of concerned citizens acting collectively as individuals. Because there is no such thing in this system. What they say is the rights of the community. There are no rights of a community. All rights are the rights of an individual within a community. And the consensus that's imposed from above is that you've all agreed on something that you never had any participation in. And that is the system we're in. And that is communitarianism. So if you understand that, then you can start doing your own thing and start maybe ticking their boxes. I don't know what the aims of your group are, but what I would not recommend is basically getting yourself into trouble when you don't need to, because I can see that happening. If you don't need to get into trouble, don't get into trouble, because things have changed within the last 10 years. When I was doing it, it was bad. Now it's tyrannical. I do believe that there is a mass depopulation underway, because from all of the documents I've read over the last 20 years, that is the one principal aim of sustainable development, which is the new global governance managing system. We have unstructured global governance through corporations, which is, again, what we were talking about earlier. Our Common Future in 1987 clearly says this, but it also reiterates the population problem. The population problem is the obsession of these people